Greetings, colleagues, and welcome to Day 3 of the ARIS Summit 2022. My name is Tom Tubon, and I serve as part of the ARIS leadership team for strategic partnerships and workforce development. I hold an appointment as Chief Workforce Development Officer for the Department of Defense Catalyzed Bioindustrial Manufacturing Design Ecosystem, also known as BioMADE. It is my distinct honor today to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Erwin Gianchandani. Dr. Gianchandani is a U.S. National Science Foundation Assistant Director for Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships, leading the newly established TIP Directorate. He has worked at the NSF since 2012, and prior to becoming the Assistant Director for TIP, he served as a Senior Advisor for Translation, Innovation, and Partnerships, where he's helped develop plans for the new TIP Directorate in collaboration with colleagues at NSF, other government agencies, industry, and academia. During the previous 6 years, Dr. Gianchandani was the NSF Deputy Assistant Director for Computer and Information Science and Engineering, twice serving as Acting Assistant Director for SICE. His leadership and management of SICE included the formulation and implementation of the Directorate's $1 billion annual budget, strategic and human capital planning, and oversight of day-to-day operations for a team of more than 130. He has led the development and launch of several new initiatives, including the Smart and Connected Communities Program, Civic Innovation Challenge, Platforms for Advanced Wireless Research, and the National Artificial Intelligence Research Institutes. He holds a bachelor's degree in computer science and master's and doctoral degree in biomedical engineering, all from the University of Virginia. And in 2021, Dr. Gianchandani received the Distinguished Presidential Rank Award, awarded to members of the federal government senior executive service for sustained extraordinary accomplishment. In 2018, he was awarded the Outstanding Young Engineering Graduate Award from the University of Virginia. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Gianchandani to our forum and as part of our keynote. Dr. Gianchandani.
Well, thanks so very much for that very kind introduction, Dr. Tubin, and good afternoon to you and good afternoon, everybody. So first of all, let me just do a quick mic and sound and video check. You can see the slides okay? You can hear me okay, Tom?
Yes, you are good.
Yes, sir.
Okay, perfect, great. So thanks very much, and good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you might be located. As Tom mentioned, I'm Erwin Gianchandani. I serve as the Assistant Director for Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships, a new directorate at the National Science Foundation, and it's my pleasure to be with you all today and to spend some time to chat about our plans for this new directorate. And I think it's actually, I'm very grateful for the opportunity, the invitation, and the opportunity to speak to this group today, because in large part, a lot of what we talk about with TIP in terms of the impact of the work that we're trying to enable in TIP and really across the foundation, I think, and I hope will resonate with all of you and the ARIS goals at the end of the day. So with that, let me start first with just a little bit of an outline of what I hope to cover over the next half hour, 35 minutes or so, as I work my way through kind of a little bit of background and context setting for TIP. And then hopefully there'll be plenty of time for questions, Q&A as well at the end as part of this hour-long session. So first of all, I'm going to spend a little bit of time at the outset framing the inspiration, the motivation, and the mission and vision for a new directorate. We don't do this every day at NSF, as many of you know. The last time the National Science Foundation established a new directorate was 32 years ago. So it's truly a once-in-a-generation opportunity. And so we're going to spend some time talking about why now. Then I'll talk a little bit about how this directorate will operate in terms of some of the key functions that the directorate will have, as well as some of the key programmatics that follow on from those functions. Form following function, as my boss, Sethuram Panchanathan, the NSF director, likes to say. So let me first start with a little bit of that inspiration. I think many of you are very familiar with the mission of NSF. We've been around for 72 years. And since the time of our founding by Congressional Charter in 1950, we have sought to promote the progress of science, to advance the nation's health and welfare and prosperity, and to secure the national defense as well. And we do that in particular by supporting investments in all of the areas of science and engineering, from biological sciences to engineering to computer and information science and engineering and beyond. We really do that by covering all of the frontiers of STEM. Pretty much the only area, as you know, that we don't touch is medical research. And that's largely because that tends to be the purview of our colleagues at the National Institutes of Health, though we do have collaborations even with NIH around the delivery of care through novel health information technologies, for example. And as we support this scientific enterprise all across the country, a couple of slides here just to kind of remind all of us of the role that NSF plays in that scientific enterprise. So our budget in the most recent fiscal year, the current one that we're living through right now, fiscal year 2022, is $8.8 billion as appropriated to us from Congress. And I always highlight three numbers on this chart: 93%, which corresponds to the funding that goes out to the research and education community. So pretty low overhead agency, and all of our funding is extramural. And then 318,000 people whom we touch, hopefully many of you in the audience today, including faculty at all levels, students at all levels, from postdocs to graduate students to undergraduate students to associate's degree candidates to K through 12 students. Really, that at the end of the day is why we do this, to train and nurture the next generation of talent all across the country. And then finally, the third number that I'll highlight is the $181 million. That's $181 million of investment by NSF in the most recently completed fiscal year 2021, to seed new public and private partnerships. That money being matched by funding and resources from stakeholders in other sectors to help support the research and education enterprise. And you'll hear me talk more about partnerships throughout the course of this presentation. And lastly, when we think about the role of NSF, this is maybe a slide that keeps many of us at NSF up at night, speaks to, in some sense, how much of the academic basic research engagement that takes place on a day-to-day basis that's funded by the federal government is the result of NSF investment, about a quarter across all of science and engineering. And you can see how much that varies, up to more than 3/4 of all federally funded academic basic research in computer science flowing through the National Science Foundation. So with that is just some context, right? And I always put those slides up because I want to stress that what you're going to hear me talk about for the rest of this presentation is really in alignment with that mission statement for NSF and what we've been doing day to day for the better part of 7 decades now. It is a defining moment, however. We are faced with intense global competition. Other countries that are investing at rapid paces in R&D. Sometimes their pace of investment is growing at a faster clip than in the US. Sometimes those countries have like-minded values, shared values as with the US. Sometimes the value propositions might be a bit different. We see bipartisan support in the form of legislators on Capitol Hill, both the House and the Senate, both Democrats and Republicans, with the administration as well. So a lot of support for the science and engineering and education that we fund out of NSF. And then I think a third critical defining element for us right now in this moment is the fact that we need to do a better job. I think there's growing recognition of how we need to do a better job of really engaging the vast and diverse talent that exists all across our nation today. Yes, we fund the coasts. Yes, we fund the big cities. Yes, we fund the big schools. But how do we engage with everyone everywhere so that all of the country has an opportunity to really be able to participate in the conduct of STEM research and education and activity on a day-to-day basis? So those are 3 characteristics of a defining moment that we feel we face today. And the fourth, in some ways, is this changing science and engineering enterprise. And in particular, when we think about this changing science and engineering enterprise today, if you go back over the course of the last 5 or 10 years, I think you all would agree that the pace of discovery in every field, and for that matter, in every sector of our society, has dramatically accelerated as a result of access to unprecedented amounts of data, as well as access to emerging technologies like machine learning that allow us to be able to analyze that data in real time and extract meaningful insights that can contribute to decision making. So pace of discovery is rapidly hastening. When we think about today's early career researchers, and I'm even talking about the students coming into colleges today all across the country who have been impacted by the pandemic over the course of the last 2 or 3 years. They've seen firsthand how science can contribute to discovery and innovation leading to vaccines, for example. I think many of you would agree that today's early career talent is very interested in coming into STEM specifically because they want to have a positive net impact on society in a variety of different ways with the work that they do. And then finally, when we think about where STEM talent is, that's graduating from our schools and universities across the country, it's no longer the case that STEM talent goes off into academia, maybe academia and industry, but rather distributed across a whole host of sectors. State, local, tribal governments, nonprofits and philanthropic organizations, communities of practice, civil society. And so it's incumbent upon us to be able to see how do we bring together that talent from a variety of different perspectives and backgrounds and sectors, and how do we create the partnerships that affords blended teams that allow us to be able to have impact with the work that we do on some of today's most pressing societal and economic and technological challenges. And so that really serves as the motivation for us, this defining moment in those 4 ways that I talked about on the last couple of slides. And it takes us to trying to meet this moment with an intentional focus. Specifically, if you look at this chart, some of you may have seen this chart or a version of this chart, and you think about where NSF straddles with this chart. Specifically, we have long supported investments across the top half, from pure basic discovery-oriented, curiosity-driven research to much more use-inspired, solution-oriented research and innovation. For example, if I take the field of artificial intelligence, I see how we have supported pioneering investments in learning and reasoning and knowledge representation and so forth, on the pure basic side. And we also support investments at the intersection between AI and agriculture to help advance both ag and also advance AI techniques. Another way of thinking about this, I think many of you saw last week the announcement of the Event Horizon Telescope's discovery around the black hole in the Milky Way galaxy, very pure, basic, discovery-oriented research. At the same time, with the pandemic, shortly after the onset of the pandemic here in the US, NSF supported more than $200 million worth of rapid research projects, including work that helped model the spike protein on SARS-CoV-2, the virus, to better understand how it interacts with humans, and then potentially help support the development of the treatment regimens for that virus. And so that spectrum of pure to use-inspired basic research is one that we hold near and dear here at the foundation. We also invest in translation and innovation, this third axis, if you will, with a real emphasis around thinking about how do we take the research results and take them to market. NSF has pioneered the SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research Program. We've pioneered the I-Corps program over the years. And so how do we continue to enhance that translational work? We don't focus as much on pure applied research, and that's okay because that tends to be the purview of other mission agencies in the federal government. And so when I think about that moment in time that I described in the last couple of slides, and I juxtapose it with the NSF mission space, what we'd like to do is really put an intentional focus with the investments, some of the investments that we make anyway, around use-inspired basic research and translation and innovation. And I'm going to talk about how this is a balanced approach that we have in mind with pure basic research. I'll do that in just a second. So to put this in another way, if you think about the NSF's existing directorates and offices, from bio to engineering to computer science to education, human resources, and beyond, you know, there's a lot of crosstalk collaboration that happens among these directorates today. If you take our cybersecurity program, for example, 5 of the directorates listed here participate in our flagship Secure and Trustworthy Cyberspace, or SATC program. So by no means are we siloed, but we would like to even expand upon that collaboration and think of this new Directorate for Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships as a horizontal that allows us to be able to truly enhance use-inspired and translational research all across the scientific enterprise. We're seeing use-inspired and translational work, albeit to varying degrees, across all of our directorates. Here's an opportunity for us, through intentional collaboration and partnership with TIP, to be able to strengthen and scale those investments to really elevate those investments to the next level for impact on society in the nearer term. So if I were to distill everything that I've said over the last few minutes down into one slide, what I would say is, and this is broad brushstrokes, because I think some of you in this audience in particular could very easily point to programs at NSF that maybe aren't in this mold, and for good reason. And we're very proud of those investments as well. But by and large, broad brushstrokes, a lot of our investments over the course of the last many decades have been largely investigator driven. So that is to say, academic researchers with great ideas, pulling together academic research teams with students and others. It has resulted in a steady stream of discoveries that has dramatically improved quality of life in our country on a day-to-day basis. But what we'd like to do with TIP is to sort of broaden that perspective a little bit and really intentionally engage the users, the beneficiaries, the consumers of research in shaping research directions, working hand in glove with academic researchers and students in conducting that research, in piloting approaches and solutions. So really it's about multi-sector teams bringing together varied perspectives and a better understanding of nearer term challenges that we face, to really have those important societal, economic, technological challenges drive some of the research pursuits. So whereas we're really good at thinking about great ideas and great researchers and students and resulting in great new scientific discoveries and technologies that we can then try to push to the market, we'd like to get better at thinking about bringing the market to the table from the get-go and having the market help to shape some of the work that we're trying to do, and then be excited enough to accelerate the translation or the pulling out of some of the research results into the market and into practice more generally. And so that is the sort of inspiration, if you will, and the vision space that led us to launching this new directorate back on March 16th of this year. And I'll say now what we said at the time, which is that this is really a critical first step to accelerate the development of new products, new technologies, economic growth, new jobs, strengthening and sustaining the US's position in the vanguard of competitiveness globally. Really a first step, and we look forward to the next steps by Congress and others as we think about appropriations for this directorate so that we can fully realize the vision that we have called out. And as a matter of fact, the President's FY 2023 budget request speaks to the resourcing for this directorate to some degree. So that budget request calls for, some of you have, I think, seen $10.5 billion for the foundation. So that's about a 20% increase over our current enacted levels. So remember I said earlier, $8.8 billion for the agency, growing to $10.5 billion in this budget request. It is a request. We have to see what Congress does for fiscal year 2023. And as part of that request, close to $900 million of investment for TIP proper. And of that $900 million, some significant fraction of that aligned with the investments that we're making, not just through TIP, but other directorates across the foundation in critical and emerging technology areas like advanced manufacturing, advanced materials, advanced wireless, AI, biotech, microelectronics, quantum information science, and the list goes on even beyond what you see on this particular slide. I think one important point that I want to emphasize here, because I get this question often, is the balance with which we're trying to approach this new directorate. So you heard me say that the increase to the foundation in the request is about 20%. That's about $1.7 billion of a plus up relative to the FY 2022 level. Of that $1.7 billion, about $500 million of new money is in the TIP directorate in this request. We have another $370 million worth of existing programs that are being repositioned into TIP. So the point there is that there's a significant uptick for NSF. There's a portion of that that's destined for TIP, but it is part of a broader increase for NSF that benefits the rest of the foundation as well. So really trying hard not to rob Peter in order to pay Paul, for example. So I hope this gives you a sense for how we think about why a new directorate and why now, and what would this directorate strive to do if we think out into the future over the next several years. So I'm now going to take the next few minutes to translate that mission and vision into some key functional attributes for TIP. And I think here, I hope, is where some of you will see yourselves in the mission space, the vision space for the directorate. So for us, first and foremost is partnerships. That's sort of the building block, the foundational block, if you will, for this directorate. And you'll see over the next few slides some horizontals across the directorates at the bottom with intention. We want to collaborate with those directorates. We really see TIP as a horizontal. That first horizontal for us is about partnerships. For us to be successful in what we're trying to do with TIP, we need to bring together multiple sectors and stakeholders to really help to shape and co-design and co-create challenges and approaches. An example of this is a collaboration that we announced just a few months ago with Intel. This is a $20 billion investment by Intel that Intel has announced on its own, to be clear, to stand up a couple of chip making facilities in the state of Ohio. And it builds off of an announcement that they had in Arizona last year as well. As part of that $20 billion investment, they have announced a partnership with NSF to the tune of $100 million over the next several years, $50 million from Intel to be matched with $50 million from NSF, specifically to support universities. And I want to emphasize here all different kinds of universities, including community colleges and minority serving institutions as well, specifically around the research that we need, as well as the new curricular and instructional materials and teacher professional development, the new educational activities that we need as well in order to be able to advance the frontiers of semiconductor design and manufacturing, as well as the workforce that we're going to need for the next generation of fab manufacturing facilities and so forth, and fab designs and semiconductor designs as we look to the future. So this is an example of a direct partnership between NSF and our colleagues in the private sector. We have other examples of these with other companies, with nonprofits and foundations and so forth. There are also examples of the partnerships that we can catalyze with our investments. How can NSF investment in a particular project, in a particular institution, help motivate and inspire the partnerships that can engender that co-design and co-creation that I spoke of a few slides ago? So partnerships for us is a foundation, and they build toward innovation and technology ecosystems, that next layer, that next crosscut going across. And here, when we think about innovation and technology ecosystems, again, it's about pulling together the right stakeholders, and it's about, in some sense, motivating innovation at the scale of regions all across the country. So we have some existing programs at NSF, the Convergence Accelerator in particular, that is repositioned now into the TIP Directorate. The Convergence Accelerator here at NSF, as some of you may know, has for the last several years really honed in on a mission space of use-inspired research, bringing together stakeholders from different sectors, thinking about co-design, co-creation, thinking about how we can scale that research to impact in the nearer term. We've supported work from AI and the future of work, for example. How do AI techniques change the workplace? How do we have humans and AI interface in the workplace environment? To quantum technologies, new quantum computing platforms, to thinking about trust and authenticity in our communication systems, something that continues to be a prevalent topic, to thinking about enhancing opportunities in terms of new technologies that can support persons with disabilities. So just a number of tracks that have this sort of very point focus around use-inspired research, and that bring together teams in cohorts where we fund a large number of smaller projects initially in each track, and then down select to a smaller number of larger projects. But building upon that Convergence Accelerator, we have ideas of new investments in the TIP Directorate that would really hone in on emerging technologies and regional scale innovation. And I'll give you one example of that in just a moment. We also have a particular emphasis on experiential and entrepreneurial learning. I think that the time is now for us to go beyond the sort of in-classroom instruction that we provide to our students at all levels, and for us to really think strategically about how do we bring students together with companies, or together with state and local and tribal governments, or together with other sectors, so that they can have practical experiences as internships or externships, if you will, that complement what they're learning in the classroom setting, so that they can be better positioned for jobs on day one. And maybe some of those internships and externship opportunities can even turn into jobs for them as well. So that's how we think about this innovation and technology ecosystem, churning out new technologies as well as workforce capabilities into the future. And then the third tranche, the third focus area for us is around technology translation. And here I'm going to spend just a moment, if I may. So there are some existing programs, the Innovation Core program, the Partnerships for Innovation program, and the SBIR, STTR programs that we've long had at NSF that constitute a lab to market platform. How do we provide researchers and students and entrepreneurs with the resourcing so that they can undertake customer discovery and better understand market fitness for their concept? How do they then partner with industry to be able to maybe license some of their seminal work, to be able to do some of the hardening and maturing of some of their research ideas? And then how do they, with SBIR, STTR specifically, how do they utilize resourcing to be able to do the de-risking of deep tech ventures so that they can get to a place where that SBIR, STTR takes off and really has impact on the market segment that they're operating in? So we have this vibrant lab to market platform, and we want to look to see that grow through the investments that we make through TIP. But we also want to think about innovative pathways of translational impact. And if there's time in the Q&A, I can come back to this and talk to this in a little bit more depth. But with respect to those innovative pathways, I think for us, it's especially important to go beyond the market, lab to market impact, and think about the other forms of impact of the research that we're supporting. So for instance, we know that in some fields, in some sectors, like the wireless sector, open source ecosystems can offer a competitive advantage relative to some of the closed box approaches that we see in other nations. And so can we provide our researchers with the resourcing and the capabilities and the training even to think through how they take a research output and move it down the pathway toward an open source ecosystem that in and of itself is vibrant and self-sustaining and fostering continued innovation of that technology or that capability that's the output. Could be software, it could be an approach, it could be a model, it could be a whole host of things down that path. And there are other such lineages where you can think about the impact of NSF-funded research. For example, teeing up research for policymaking at the FCC or the EPA and so forth. We don't do that policy making at NSF, but we can help our researchers harden and mature their work so that it can serve as input into some of those conversations in a very informed manner. Education research that we support in a number of different areas, and how do we see that education research potentially starting to scale so that there's a translational component there, a translational pathway to impact. So really trying to build out those lineages just as we built out the lab to market lineage, but thinking about some of those innovative pathways to technology translation longer term. So I hope that gives you a sense for sort of the three key functional attributes associated with this directorate around partnerships, around innovation and technology ecosystems, and around technology translation. And then for the last part of this talk, I'm going to give you one example of a program. If there's more time, I could step through additional examples, but I'm going to give you one example in particular, and that's around regional innovation. And as a matter of fact, I'm sorry that you guys are having to listen to me this afternoon. There's a webinar that's taking place concurrent with this particular session that we have put on for this program, which is the NSF Regional Innovation Engines program. But I encourage you, if you're interested, to take a look at that webinar offline. It will be available on demand afterwards. So the NSF Regional Innovation Engines program is really about trying to cultivate new innovation ecosystems at a regional scale in different parts of the country, and particularly those parts of the country that have not benefited from these types of innovation ecosystems in specific topic spaces. So for us, this is about trying to address the major scientific and technological challenges that we face, while also solving some of the societal and economic challenges that we face as well. So you see that on this slide here. The clouds, in some sense, correspond to some of those societal and economic challenges. You may agree or disagree with these. You may have others that you want to put into these clouds. But the point is that we face a number of these challenges all across the country. And they offer motivation, inspiration for some of the research that takes place in key technology areas like AI or advanced manufacturing or advanced wireless and so on. And at the same time, as we innovate in those areas, we serve to offer new lenses on the equity challenge, on the critical and resilient infrastructure challenge, and so forth. So there's real bidirectionality here that we're looking to seize upon with our investments in the NSF Engines program. And then thirdly, there's balancing technical and geographic innovation. So we want to see the innovation in these areas that I just spoke of, but we also have to recognize that these challenges that we face vary depending upon where you are in the country. I'll take climate change for just a moment, if I may. We've seen droughts and wildfires in the Southwest and on the West Coast. We've seen just yesterday, even a severe line of thunderstorms that knocked out power and knocked down trees and created some flooding and other damage here on the East Coast, in the Mid-Atlantic, and in the Northeast. So the impacts of this are felt very differently across different parts of the country. And that's true whether you're talking about climate, or you're talking about transportation challenges, or you're talking about agricultural challenges, food production, and so forth. And so how do we harness that geographic diversity in terms of the challenges, as well as the talent that can be brought to bear to address some of those challenges as well? So for us, the engines are really an intentionally different approach. It's a different scale of investment. We're talking about $160 million potentially over a 10-year horizon. And we feel that that level of investment is necessary because we're trying to do something a little bit different. We're asking for that intentional engagement of a broad and diverse set of stakeholders, the users, if you will, in co-designing, co-creating challenges and solutions. We recognize that this is going to require very concrete sort of milestones and an assessment and evaluation of progress against those milestones. It's going to require working with the teams, almost creating a cohort, maybe on topic spaces that are shared across different geographic regions. And it's going to require a focus on success expectations that are a bit different from your typical NSF project. We're really interested in seeing how does this in the longer term drive regional scale development. We're interested in seeing how we're ensuring that there's a diversity of thought in terms of the participation in a given engine. I won't go through all of these bullets in a lot of detail, but maybe I'll just highlight that this is a little bit of a culture shift, a little bit of a culture change, in the sense that, yes, this comes at it from a place of basic research, use-inspired and translational research. But we are also deeply interested in seeing what the impact is. So it is the case that we want to see some publications and conference proceedings, but for an engine to be successful, it has to go beyond that. We have to think about the other forms of impact, including new technology capabilities, new startups and small businesses, new open source ecosystems, thinking about the new educational pathways that are enabled. And by that, I refer to not just training at the PhD level, but training at all levels, including at the community college level, for example, at the K through 12 level. How do we train the next generation of not just researchers, but also practitioners and entrepreneurs and technicians and educators who will train the next generation, and so on. So if I think about this in very concrete terms and just try to offer some examples of what I mean, I learn by example, so hopefully this will be of help. I could pick out different parts of the country: Silicon Valley, Kendall Square, and so on. I'm going to highlight four, though, that have come to my mind over the course of thinking about this over the last several months. There's Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Carnegie Mellon University and the University of Pittsburgh there, and the robotics industry, vibrant robotics industry that has set up shop in that town as a result of the innovation that's taking place. There's Nashville, Tennessee, and the medical device industry that we see around the university and the hospital there. Chattanooga, Tennessee has a story about the Electric Power Board deploying high-speed fiber optic cable to ensure high-speed power switches, electric grid switches. That fiber optic cabling is now driving the gig network and the gig economy that's resulting in Chattanooga and the surrounding areas. And finally, Huntsville, Alabama, with the with the military base there and the defense and aerospace industry that you see around Huntsville, Alabama. So those are four examples. And what we'd like to ask is, with some significant investment from NSF and with some framing, understanding that every single one of these innovation ecosystems is a little bit different, but with some framing, can we create the framework that allows us to be able to spread that innovation, expand that innovation potential throughout the US, really seize upon the the innovation potential and expand the innovation ecosystems throughout the US. So another way of characterizing this is, can an investment by NSF and this framing of trying to bring together industry and IHEs and government and nonprofits and community organizations around a topic area of regional relevance, around thinking through that entire ecosystem from use-inspired research to translational research to the impact, can that framing serve as the nucleus of the development of a regional innovation ecosystem that over time grows and gets to the point where it becomes self-sustaining and not reliant upon continued NSF funding beyond the decade that we would support this effort? So that is the question before us with the regional innovation engines. And like I said, there's a webinar that's taking place this afternoon. We have some Q&A sessions coming up over the next few weeks. And we also have a series of regional roadshows that I would encourage you all to participate in. Particularly, I'll note that please don't think about where your state may be within the rest of the states here as any indication of what we mean by region. You get to define region for a regional innovation engine, but we had to figure out how to carve up the country in some manageable way for each of these webinars and state-by-state breakout rooms that we want to try to orchestrate. And the deadlines for the engines program are quickly approaching. I'll just note the type 1 proposals. So those are for development grants, planning grants, if you will, to stitch together more fully a team and an initiative around an engine, as well as type 2 concept outlines for engines that where the partners are there. There's still a lot more to be done, but the partners have sort of started to coalesce, and you're a little bit further along in terms of the thinking and the planning. The concept outlines for the 1s and 2s are due on June 30th, and then the deadlines for the type 1 full proposals in late September to give folks time to stitch together the teams and the proposals, and we'll be announcing type 2 deadlines down the road as well. So I hope that this gives you a flavor for how we're thinking about the Directorate, the functions of the Directorate, and then just as one illustration, an example program with the regional innovation engines. Before I close, I just want to emphasize one important point, which is the significance that we are placing on diversity and equity and inclusivity and accessibility in this Directorate. And it's true more generally at NSF. I think our current director takes this to heart, is really passionate about what are the steps that we can take to be able to broaden participation and really engage everyone everywhere. He notes that there's talent everywhere, and it's our responsibility to create the opportunities to engage that talent. Well, in that context, we've been having a number of conversations with our colleagues in the community, including some of you on this call, to better understand sort of the challenges that different institution types face, and to get to a place where we can design in DEIA. So I come from a computer science background in part, and in the world of cybersecurity, as some of you may know, for many years in the world of cybersecurity, we used to design new computer systems, and then we would kind of go back in and figure out how to secure those systems. And we've gotten better over the course of the last decade plus, because I think there's a much greater realization that you have to design in security from the very beginning in order to ensure that that security is in place through and through, and guard against some of the cybersecurity challenges that we have borne witness to over the course of the last several years. And so the same, I think that analogy is relevant in the context of DEIA. We have to design programs with an emphasis on DEIA baked into them from the very beginning. And as we do that, we need to better understand what has traditionally prevented folks at HBCUs and HSIs and TCUs and community colleges and PUIs and others to engage with NSF programs. And so we've had a series of listening sessions where the goal has been to try to better understand some of the challenges, whether it be the challenges to building strong partnerships or the need for capacity building at small institutions. What can NSF do to provide for some of the core services that are necessary if you're applying for an NSF grant, from sponsored research office to tech transfer office and everything in between. The challenges with NSF policies. So traditionally, we've said up to 2 months of time for a faculty member can be charged to NSF grants, to active NSF grants. Well, how do we recognize that in the case of smaller institutions, the teaching load can be great. That teaching load can prevent one from being able to participate on an NSF proposal and award. How do we mitigate against that? The value of mentoring. I talked about the regional innovation engines. I talked about sort of a focus on a region of service. Well, we may have a region of service. We may have a emerging research institution that's taking the lead there. Maybe it could benefit from some mentoring from another institution that's in a different region, not necessarily that region, but that can provide some mentoring that is based off of that institution's experiences with an innovation ecosystem and economy. And then how do we overcome sort of geographic isolation where, if you're not in an urban environment where you have universities very proximal to you, how do we nevertheless still allow folks to be able to engage across long distances in rural parts of the country all across the US? So thinking about DEIA has been something that's really been a bedrock of our planning, and we've tried to incorporate this, and there's a lot more we could do to get this right, but I think trying to take those initial steps to move in the right direction. So with that, I'm going to wrap up with just a couple of slides here. One, to summarize that the status of the directorate. I used to have this slide in here when I was talking in the subjunctive form. We hadn't yet launched TIP, but now I can say proudly that we have launched the TIP Directorate back in March. We've repositioned the programs that I talked about and have planned and now launched new investments, including the regional innovation engines. And one final note is we are recruiting. We are recruiting for folks to come work in a directorate here at the National Science Foundation and a new directorate here at the National Science Foundation. And so if you are interested in that, particularly if you have background and some expertise in thinking about that translational impact of NSF-funded research and going beyond I-Corps, PFI, and SBIRS TTR, and it's the programs that are on this slide, but going even beyond that to some of those other lineages that I talked about. I think this group in particular does a lot of thinking in that realm. And so if you're interested in coming to work at NSF, please feel free to reach out either to the addresses below or to me directly, and I'll make sure that you get in touch with the right folks. And so if I close with just one maybe takeaway, right? I think many of you have probably seen a version of this chart. I would love to, at some point, replace market with society. But there, we talk about this valley of death where there's a lot of public investment in foundational research, a lot of private sector investment, more on the applied side, more on the commercialization side, product development side. If I were to describe the essence of TIP, it's not about a bridge across the valley of death because, well, for one thing, I think that's just a tried expression. But I think really the valley of death gives us sort of this ramp of opportunity to think about TIP programmatics, to think about how starting from use-inspired research and working forward, and how collaborating with colleagues at the Department of Commerce with the Economic Development Administration's Build Back Better Regional Challenge, for instance, or other investments that EDA is making, collaborating with other federal agencies, collaborating with other sectors, how we can leverage this ramp of opportunity to make progress across from use-inspired research on forward. So I hope that this is helpful. And with that, I was asked to keep it to about a half hour, 35 minutes or so. So maybe I ran just a couple of minutes longer, but I'll pause and see what questions folks have at this point.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Gianchandani. This was a fantastic talk and an introduction to TIP. We do have a number of questions, actually an overload of questions coming into the chat box. I want to ask the first one that's an extension of the last figure that you showed for the Valley of Death. And I think that there's a lot of synergy out there between different organizations that are focusing on the same area. So to spin out the Valley of Death, the Department of Defense, for example, has a similar graphic, and they have on the axis the manufacturing readiness levels. Concept is still the same. You want to accelerate these ideas and innovations to commercialization. And so my first question here to start off is really what kind of partnerships and bridges are being made to the existing Manufacturing USA networks that are there? Because I think there's some great opportunities to tap into.
So Tom, thanks for asking that question. I'm glad you're leading off with that. So let me just say that just to be succinct here, I could go on for a while about this, but to be succinct, it is absolutely the case that there could well be synergies with the Manufacturing USA efforts. And there are a whole host of center scale efforts, in fact, that are trying to leverage and build the bridges across that valley of death that we could synergize with. I actually have a conversation with colleagues at NIST coming up here in the not too distant future around some of the manufacturing efforts, Manufacturing USA efforts. I've talked with colleagues at DoD and the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for R&E, Research and Engineering as well, about potential collaborations. if I may say so, and we'd have to ask the director about this. Part of the reason I think why he reached out to me some time ago is because of the fact that I've really tried in my time at NSF to build those bridges with other agencies and with sectors as well. And so I think this is our opportunity to do that. To put some fuel behind that and really emphasize that. And so it is high on our list to think about the ways in which we can synergize. One last thing I'll say, Tom, because I know you have a lot of questions, or folks have lots of questions. On one of the slides about the engines, I specifically had at the very bottom, integrative and additive. So whatever we do here needs to be integrative and additive to what we're seeing other investments look like, both at NSF, engineering research centers, AI institutes, and so forth, as well as beyond the agency.
Great. So as a representative from the Biomade Manufacturing Innovation Institute, I would love to continue this conversation with you. We can take this one offline. We have a lot of questions that are popping up, and so I'm going to try to sort these through. The first one pops up from Jessica Andrews, and this is regarding partnerships. And I know that you had mentioned some strategies and tactics to deal with DEIA. This has to do more with the focus on tribal partners and TCUs. And if a list of recommendations will be coming out from that, those listening sessions that will help us to establish interactions and partnerships in a culturally appropriate way.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I don't want to get out in front of my team and commit on their behalf. So I will just say, I will take that question back. I can tell you that we have, in fact, coming out of those listening sessions, we have pulled together a set of takeaways for ourselves, right? So we have sort of a set of takeaways that we've pulled together. We've actually had a conversation as a directorate as a whole about those takeaways right now. And so I will have a conversation with my team about, does it make sense? Part of this is we had these listening sessions and we wanted to do it in a way that allowed folks to speak candidly, right? Speak with candor about the challenges that they have and how you go about building partnerships in the right way with different cultural backgrounds and perspectives. And so let me just find out if it's appropriate and how we can get that out, because I see the point there.
Thank you for that. And this is a little bit more, this next question comes from our colleague, Julie Rubin. And this has to do a little bit more with the focus on ARIS here. What you presented for TIP is definitely information that the community will rally around and rise to the occasion. What Julie's wondering is what capacities need to be built in within academic institutions to prepare them to answer the call for TIP? And where should our ARIS community focus faculty and research development efforts in order to make that match?
Yeah, so that's a good question as well. These are all great questions. Let me answer that in the following way. And I'm going to be a little bit cautious because I want to be disruptive, but I don't want to be so disruptive that I get run out of the conversation. So I think that when we think about, so our university system all across the country today, I think you all would agree, is a key reason why the US has had a competitive edge or all around the world. It is the envy of folks all around the world. So we don't want to do something that's going to completely torque that. On the flip side, though, I think that it is important for us to think about, and I think you all as a group are a great organization in that context, to think about what is the impact in the nearer term of the research that we're trying to support on society as a whole. Right. So yes, there's the technical innovation that we're trying to support. Yes, we want to see conferences and conference proceedings and publications and so forth. But we also want to measure the technological output and how that touches people. We want to measure the workforce creation and how that is changing the workplace setting and contributing to new jobs and so forth, and filling jobs that are vacant today. And so the point in this is a recognition, if you will, that success is not quantified by exclusively the measures we've long quantified success by, but we should be broadening those measures as we think about the more use-inspired, the innovation, the entrepreneurship, the translational potential of the work that we're trying to support. And so I think that that's a conversation that you all, in some sense, are trying to have and could continue to have, partnering with other folks as well around how do we think a little bit more broadly in terms of the value creation that a university is offering to its community and to its society.
So we have a fairly large and incredible community here with ARIS, with our professional science communication community, our broader impacts professionals. We have a question that's being fielded by Kiki Sanford, and she asks this question of how can we leverage this large network to benefit these regional engines and the broader TIP efforts?
Yeah, so I think it would be fabulous for this network to plug in with the eventual engines that we support, and frankly, to engage with the proposers, the folks who are thinking about being proposers, including you all for that matter, from the get-go as we think about some of these engines. So, I have already had some initial conversations, let me just say, with I've had some initial conversations with folks that are at the Department of Commerce, Economic Development Administration. So if you think about the pending legislation on the Hill, USICA, the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, as well as the America Competes Act, there's a lot of talk of NSF standing up a set of centers or engines, as we're calling them, and the Department of Commerce setting up these regional tech hubs that really focus in on economic growth and job creation. So they start from a place of economic growth and job creation. We start from a place of research, and we, in some sense, meet in the middle as you think about this more holistic spectrum. So just as we're having conversations with them about how engines can feed into their tech hubs, right? I think that it makes sense for there to be conversations between this group, this large, and I think very savvy and accomplished network here with the proposers of the regional innovation engines to think about how your focus, your emphasis, your drive on impact for society. I mean, it's in your name, right? In some sense, right? How that can really be at the sort of a driving function, a North Star, if you will, for the engines that we end up supporting. I don't know if that helps, but it's an attempt at answering that question.
Oh, it's a great answer. We have another question that's coming up from Jory Weintraub, and this has to do with more of the impact with cross-cutting programs across NSF. When you talked about horizontal integration, horizontal pathways. Will some of the cross-cutting programs that are supported by other directorates, such as Career or GRFP, also be supported by TIP as well? And this is kind of a larger scale question. I know that you brought in a lot of different things like the Convergence Accelerator and other various parts, SBIR, SCTRs and such, but there's so many areas of NSF that can benefit from what the TIP program is doing, TIP Directorate is doing.
So thanks, Tom. So a couple of things that I would say about that. First of all, with regard to some of our flagship investments. So beyond the ones that I talked about, the Convergence Accelerator, I-Core, PFI, SBIR, STTR. At the moment, we're not planning to bring in additional programs into TIP, existing programs. It's about now scaling what we're doing in those efforts and thinking about new investments that we can pursue, but new investments that we pursue in collaboration with the directorate. So let's take the engines, for instance. When I think about the topic areas that the engines are going to focus on, we're going to need the subject matter expertise of our colleagues in the existing directorates to engage as we think about managing those projects and proposals and awards eventually. That said, right, I think that there's an opportunity for TIP to co-invest and partner with the directorates even more explicitly around some of our existing investments. So let's take programs like Smart and Connected Communities or AI Institutes or the Biology Integration Institutes and so forth, Future Manufacturing. These are programs that I would argue have almost built into them an emphasis around use-inspired research. And, there's an opportunity for TIP to partner with those directorates and programs and experts in those areas to almost push the needle a little bit further in terms of translational research activities and really bringing the users to bear from the get-go and helping to accelerate the translation of work to practice. So I think that, we're thinking a lot about that. It's going to require, when we talk about co-funding, there's the funding word, the big important word. It's going to require additional appropriations. And so we'll see where we go as far as TIP and NSF are concerned in the future years. In terms of career, and some of those other cross-cutting programs. So the one thing that I'll say on that is, I do think that it is important for us to be sure that we don't do anything that's detrimental to the foundation and the existing parts of the foundation as well. So folks often come in with career proposals into core programs across NSF, and I think that ought to continue. By the same token, maybe we can work with our partners in the other directorates to think about the structure of a career award. I just talked about sort of this impetus for culture change a little bit. Well, we have a lot to do in the community. We have a lot to do at NSF as well in that regard. So those are some things that we can think through as we look to the future.
Excellent. I think that we're running out of our time here. We can keep you on board all afternoon. We've got a ton of questions that have come in, and maybe if we can compile those questions
Sure.
to access later, and we can forward that.
Happy to. And I'm happy to come back. I'm happy to have a further dialogue with this group. I want to just say thank you for the opportunity again. Thank you for all that you all do on a day-to-day basis. I think the work that you do is incredibly important for us to be able to really have, sorry to use the word, but to have impact with the investments that we're making on a day-to-day basis across NSF to really deliver on our mission. And so I look forward to a continued dialogue with this group into the future.
Dr. Gianchandani, I appreciate your time, as I'm sure the entire ARIS community does. Your work is tremendous, and we're looking for some incredible impacts on our community for innovation, research, education. Thank you for all you do, and thank you for your time today to speak with our group.
Thank you. Thanks for all you do.